Camp Bethel, 1929. This is Goodspeed's Landing, the East Haddam dock, located just below the bridge at the Goodspeed Opera House, looking downriver. Kay's Pageant, Camp Bethel. Kay, Catherine Conroe, directed a beautiful missionary pageant that year. Let's see how many participants we can identify. Francis Conroe and the Reverend Theodore P. Stevens lead the procession from the chapel. On the right is Dorothy Dotzer, Miriam Watkins and Grace Wiseburn, Pearl Carr and Grace Burns. On the left, Ruth Lockwood, Ruth Hatch and Violet Wood. We don't recognize either of these. On the left is Grace Schwain from China, attending Aurora College this year. On the right is Reverend Z. Charles Beals, our missionary to China. On the left, Ruth Watkins, Russell Huggins and Viola Friedman. We can't identify either of these. This may be Kenneth Babcock with Helen Giles. On the left, E. Tucker Welsh of Pasadena, California. We can't recognize this young man. The trumpeter on the right, though, is Clarence Rush, I believe. Now here's the entire cast. Recognize any of them? A remarkable shot of an unusual occurrence. Ted Stevens is helping his wife Miriam with the family washing in tubs set up in the back of their cottage. In the background is Ethel and Arthur Conant's cottage. Today it's completely modernized and remodeled and owned by their granddaughter Linda Lane and her husband Jim. To the right is the Shirtliff cottage, now torn down. Lewis, our guest preacher, 1928. This title has been superimposed on an old photograph of the Nathan Hale Schoolhouse, located in East Haddam, across the river from Camp Bethel. Large evergreen trees on the hillside now completely obstruct our view of it, but the top of the flagpole can still be seen. This is Brother Lewis. We've been unable to identify anyone in this group near the Goodell Cottage in Fairview Park, but they're obviously having fun. A view of the river and the steps leading down to it. Evangelist Timberlake and Peter Lee. Brother Timberlake from Auburn, Maine was a popular evening evangelist that year. It looks as if he were giving the photographer a Bible lesson, doesn't it? Here, he is standing beside the Stevens cottage, which was then next door to the chapel. In later years, Ted had the cottage moved to South Riverside Bluff, overlooking the river. His daughter, Marjorie Geppard, owns it now. Peter Lee lived in Wuhu, China, and had been attending Aurora College that year. He was one of the Christians martyred by the communists. A beautiful man. As one clam to another. Here's Norm Thrall, busily preparing the quahogs, probably for one of Irene's delicious clam chowders. We've always been able to buy flavorful fresh fish and shellfish in markets along the shore around Saybrook, and we still do. Where there's a Jack, there's a Jill. This is a great picture of Granville Blair and Catherine Conroe, whom he married, coming up the hill with a pail of ice-cold water from the pump house. Refreshing and delicious. Will Rush buys an ice cream cone and finds himself popular. Will is joined by his wife and their friend Ted Stevens. What, no licks? Will and Laura belonged to the New Britain Church, and Laura was the organist there for many years. A few portraits. Oh, this is an excellent picture of brother and sister Huggins. Robert G. Huggins was pastor of Second Advent Church of New Britain, Connecticut at that time. Silhouettes of Dorothy Dotzer and Gibson Lockwood. They were married in 1933. Gibb would become pastor of Second Advent Church in New Britain in 1937 and minister there for 35 years until his retirement in 1972. Come on, let's go. How about some tennis? We're not sure who this player is. It may be John B. Holland, son of Vivian and Jack Holland. You probably recognize Will Rush by now. He was president of the Life and Advent Camp Meeting Association. And here's Chester Appy. Chet was a member of the New York Stock Exchange. Felt called to the ministry, was ordained and pastored the Eatontown, New Jersey church, while still continuing his career on Wall Street. Here's Will Rush again. Here's Norm Thrall, and we do believe his partner is his nephew John Holland. Norman was one of the pillars of the New Britain Second Advent Church, serving as its treasurer for a long period. He also held offices in the Camp Meeting Association, we recall. Look, children gain 3 to 5 pounds on this diet. That's the Stevens cottage. Ted Stevens was having ulcers, so his doctor put him on this milk diet. We have a hunch that his brother-in-law, Norm Thrall, coaxed him to pose for this shot. And of course, Ted would be obliging. Everyday occurrences. There's Margaret Denton on the left with Sister Anna, chatting with Eva Watkins, wife of Elmore. Eva was Christian Education Chairman and initiated the YPI program at Camp Bethel in 1945. This is Perlin Reed, a third-generation Camp Bethelite, making some electrical repairs, assisted by Frank Thrall, superintendent of the grounds. Perlin was the father of Marshall, Mary, Esther, and Edie Reed. There's the prayer tent in the background. We are unable to identify any of these who are enjoying a canoe ride. Dot Dotzer is returning Sister Miriam Stevens' ironing board. Song of the Vulgar Boatman. Here's Norm Thrall rowing downstream from the Salmon River, it appears. Gordon is in the bow behind him. Probably Irene is in the stern, photographing, with Sid next to her. They're headed back to camp. A campfire gathering. There's no indication really as to where this campfire is. We think it might be in back of the chapel because we remember that they did have a campfire there at one time. It was a good spot for it. Thou from hence my all shall be. That's a line from a baptismal hymn often sung by those on shore as the minister and candidates walked out into the river. There's Brother T.P. Stevens with Philip Rush, we believe. Ted Stevens had become pastor of the Aurora Advent Christian Church in 1926. He became president of Aurora College in 1933, but continued to spend August at Camp Bethel and minister during camp meetings almost every year until his death in 1963. Brothers Babcock and Stevens lay hands on Philip as prayer is offered. A day at Hammonasset. Hammonasset Beach is a state park on Long Island Sound, and for a number of years we had a picnic there either during or after camp meeting. Note the 1929 styles and swimsuits. This may be Edith Weisburn Haviland with one of her daughters. But we know for sure this couple is Chester Appy and his fiancée or wife, Grace. There's Irene Thrall and sons, Sidney and Gordon. Harry Babcock passes by with his son Stuart, probably. This is Jessie Weisburn and daughter Grace. And finally, Jessie's husband, Arthur, always hamming it up. Carry me back to old Virginia. We always love to see the folks from our Richmond, Virginia church arrive for camp meeting. Now here they are leaving. There's Mrs. Shepherd at the right. We could spot her anywhere. Coming up at the left will be Mildred Hooper. There she is. Miss Hooper was a leader in the denomination as well as in the New Britain Church. She was a fine teacher, a remarkable woman. She became secretary of the Life and Advent Union, and finally its president, being the last person to serve in that capacity, as well as being the final editor of the Herald of Life. Homeward bound. By train now, on the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. We can't tell you the location of this scene, but isn't it beautiful? And so we come to the end. We've come to the end of the 1929 movie, and the 1930 movie is now coming up. Camp Bethel. (1930). To hear again the wind through the trees and feel the clasp of a friendly hand, to hear the voices of those we love raised in prayer to Almighty God. That is Camp Bethel. We're now looking at the Connecticut River from East Haddam, possibly from the entrance of the Salmon River. There's the bridge and a tug pulling one or two barges down the river. A view of a few cottages on the campground. At every turn, we meet familiar faces. Lynn Lockwood at the left, Brother Lowe from Hartford, and probably his wife. Here's the way it was done 50 years ago, so Auntie Mabel says. Up goes the prayer tent. We see Elmore Watkins on the left, Brother Frank Thrall and others. Looks easy, doesn't it? The gathering of the clan. These are members of the New Britain Church. Call out the names of people you recognize. There's Sister Hooper, Mildred's mother, walking by. Remember that day down by the fence? An old snapshot of Elmore Watkins, Eva Smith, Daisy White, and Joshua Fabian. And now we are aged and gray. And there they are now, in the same position at the fence, Elmore and Eva Watkins and Daisy and Josh Fabian. Sunday school is over, and we're going home. Recognize anybody? You'll see a great picture of Mildred Hooper coming out of the chapel on the right. Camp Bethel Bible School was not started until 1940. Here's 13-year-old Howard Lockwood and his 12-year-old tennis partner, David Stevens. There's David. This opponent might be Phil Rush, but who's his partner? Sid Thrall joins his mother on the porch, while down below are Norman Holland, his cousin, with Gordon. Playing together here are Holland's children, Corbin children, Stevens children, and others. There's David Stevens at the left with one of the Corbins. Howard Lockwood running over to Dave. There's Gordon Thrall and Marge. 10-year-old Marjorie Stevens with George Corbin behind her. And there's Alice Ball. Much later, Alice became the American Bible Society's first woman executive secretary. Here they are, the president and vice president. And yet they have athlete's foot. Vice President Stevens on the left, President Watkins here, of the LNA Union, you understand, as we found them. On the left, Ted Stevens and James Frost. Oh, here come Gertrude, Kalar, and Dorothy Dotzer. In the middle is Mrs. Huggins with Irene Thrall at the right. Anyone know who these are standing behind the Denton cottage? They'll never tell what happened before this picture was taken. Clarence Rush and John Holland after a tennis match, apparently. Succotash. This is probably Mr. Miner's truck from Deep River. Customers at the back are brother and sister Hooper, Mildred's parents. The young man at the right looks like Paul Friedman. Here are Fan Conroe, Miriam Watkins, Irene Thrall, and Ruth Watkins. Unaware. Chatting outside the dining room at the right is Mrs. Lillian Simons. This is Brother William Emerson, Bill, from Kensington, Connecticut, a pillar of the New Britain Church. Taking down the laundry are Edith Haviland, Ruth Giles, Coward, and Helen Giles, years later to become Elmore Watkins' second wife. T.P. Stevens and Gertrude Kaler. Gertrude would be going out to attend Aurora College in the fall. This looks like Samuel Emerson. Sam was Bill's brother, also a pillar of the church. Auntie Mabel Miner and Irene Thrall, devoted friends. 'Twas the night before Sunday, and down on the shore a few brethren were gathered. There should have been more. There's Lynn Lockwood. Got your ivory soap with you? Ted Stevens arrives. And Clarence Rush. Those were the days before our cottages had bathrooms. There was an icy shower at the pump house after a river bath, if you wanted it. Sunshine before the shower. All dressed up for a big date. Don and Helen Jenks Lockwood, married in May, and Dot Dotzer and Gib Lockwood, engaged. After rehearsal. These look like choir members. We don't know where they had their rehearsal. If that is the case, whom do you recognize? We take a few more shots. That's a wonderful view of the stump of the historic old chestnut tree in front of the chapel. At this point, the stump has been entirely removed and there's a stone memorial in its place. However, a portion of the stump is still available for viewing. A beautiful portrait of Frank N. and Lizzie B. Thrall. These need identification. Gordon and Sidney Thrall amusing themselves. L. Burns and Ellsworth Watson. Margaret Denton and Sister Anna engaged in cottage chores. There's Irene Thrall coming out of the Stevens cottage. Next come her sisters, Mabel Watson, Dorothy Dotzer, and Miriam Stevens, the four Dotzer girls. Left to right, Miriam, Dottie, Irene, and Mabel. They prove their worth. Alton Brown of New Britain and Carlton Whitehead of Wallingford, Connecticut, who were given ministerial licenses. Reminiscing. Longtime New London friends Miriam Stevens, Mabel Watson, Miranda Prentice, and Irene Thrall. Miranda, a social worker, was on the camp meeting program that year, telling about her work as a visiting teacher in the Boston schools. A northeaster. There goes a car across the bridge. We have a lot more traffic on the bridge these days, that's for sure. But we still have northeasters like this one once in a while. And hurricanes, too, ever since that famous 1938 one. Another gathering at the river. People who could went down to the river. Others watched the baptism from the porch of the Constant Cottage. Brother Stevens prays for the person to be baptized. That boathouse is no longer at the foot of the stairs. Neither is the pump, which supplied all the drinking water at the turn of the century, still at the railroad tracks. A few surprise shots. There's Ruth Watkins traveling her favorite way. Sid and Gordon Thrall explore the river. Ruth Lockwood with her pal Pearl Carr from New Britain, worn out after an evening at the pump house. Can you identify any of this good-looking gang? At evening time it shall be light. Zechariah 14:7. How beautiful the river is. And now you can see the bridge with the Goodspeed Opera House just beyond at the left. Finally, the Sing on the Bank, the final event of camp meeting, following the family service and communion in the chapel on the last Sunday evening. We marched over to Fairview Park singing "We Are Marching to Zion" under the leadership of Elmore Watkins. We sang our favorite hymns, always ending with "God be with you till we meet again." Then we formed a huge circle and walked around it, saying goodbye to everyone. Westward ho! And all too soon, the Stevens family had to leave for Illinois. A picture of a well-known brother, but he doesn't photograph very well. The meetings have closed, and our friends have left happy memories behind, but the beautiful ever-changing hills and valleys remain to remind us of God's greatness. And our beloved river flows on day after day, year after year. In the perennial words of Lynn Lockwood, it's still as beautiful as ever.